There are a whole bunch of really important biochemical processes that you don't really think about that testosterone regulates. And if you push a dose up too high too quick, acne, bloating, blood pressure issues. And you might get put off that dose and say, well, that dose isn't right for me. No, you just got there too quick. If you've never drank coffee before and you started with a triple espresso, you're going to be like, coffee's not for me. Same with testosterone. Okay, everyone, hope you are all doing well. Welcome to another one of my solo episodes here for Victory Men's Health. This is a very fitting platform to talk about this topic, as Victory Men's Health are one of the best clinics I've seen, if not the best clinic I've seen actually, for understanding intrinsically and practicing what I'm about to be talking about today, which is testosterone optimization therapy. Now, I don't want to get into arbitrary definitions of terms because it kind of gets into semantics, but what I'm talking about here today is this differentiation between simply correcting the baseline hypogonadal state as opposed to truly optimizing the testosterone levels of a man on TRT. And this term TOT was coined by my now friend and colleague Jay Campbell, and I remember reading his first edition of his TRT Bible, which was about this thin. And he later re-released this as the TOT Bible, replacement with optimization, in a much thicker, absolutely hefty book, which is a fantastic read if people haven't checked it out. And what he was getting at here, which in my opinion has been pivotal in impacting the future of the industry since that book came out, is the idea that if you are going to replace the testosterone levels, you should optimize them, because it's just as much work to inject an extra fraction of a mil every time you do your injection to take your levels from good to great. But this creates a little bit of nuance, because if this term or this concept is misapplied, it simply becomes a matter of saying, well, just throw more testosterone at the problem, that will fix everything. So I want to give a bit of a practical kind of takeaway on this. I know I've spoken about this before in these videos, but it's such an important topic, and I think that it's something that will resonate with a lot of people listening. And I'm going to refer to free testosterone in picomole per liter, which is the standard in Australia, most of Europe, and if you're in the UK, you just need to move the decimal place 1 point. And for people in the US, I am going to be referring to free testosterone in nanograms per deciliter. If the units are different for you, because I've seen that there can be different units used in the same country for some reason, which I don't fully understand, but you can simply convert these units over. I'll also reference the range a couple of times just to get it out of the way. The reference range has nothing to do with physiological levels, health promoting levels, anything like this. It's simply a calculation of the mean and standard deviation of people who have recently had their testosterone levels checked. And in the mainstream Western medical model, this is primarily men with prostate issues for potentially qualifying them for anti-androgen therapy, which is a whole different discussion of things that are not good. So it is of no surprise that the reference range is extremely low, and it continues to fall. It's basically in free fall. I mean, for people who've been in this industry for more than a few years, you've probably seen it drop by 10. I've been in this industry for almost a decade, and I've seen it drop by up to 30, even 40% in some countries. So I am going to reference it just as a guidepost so I don't have to use the exact units every time. But I am going to give both units so that everyone can kind of understand what I'm talking about here. So I'm just going to talk about some averages. And this is not by any means the full spectrum of all men who are hypogonadal, all men who need to have their testosterone levels optimized to this number. I'm just going to give a couple of examples just for the sake of creating a narrative. So let's say a guy starts his testosterone replacement therapy journey because it's been identified that he has an intractable, meaning unresolvable, cause of hypogonadism, meaning low testosterone. So typically, the average guy that I've seen over the years, anywhere from a 200 picomole per liter, which in nanograms per deciliter is about a 5 or 6, to, again, this is not the range of them, but just averages, to maybe a 300 picomole per liter, which is about an 8.5 in nanograms per deciliter. This is where a lot of guys kind of come in pretty low. So let's say he started on anywhere from 120 to 150 milligrams per week, which is often the status quo. assuming that he has a pretty normal SHBG and he's doing a high frequency of injections and he's getting his blood measured at an accurate trough before his next injection, all of these things are to be assumed. On average, he'd probably have a free testosterone level of about a 600 picomole per liter, which is a 17 nanogram per deciliter, up to maybe, and again, there's some variance here, but this is just the average, 800 picomole per liter, so that's a 23 nanograms per deciliter. Now, for a lot of men, this is perfect. You don't need any more. This is great. And this is a level that for many men, all your symptoms will be optimized. And over the course of 6 months, a year, 2 years, things will continue to improve and improve and improve. Feel better and better and better, assuming you're looking after yourself well, assuming you don't have other health problems that haven't been diagnosed. And higher levels than this could just cause problems. And what we would expect to see if this was the optimal level for you is that all of your comprehensive blood work markers would improve. Your markers of metabolic health would improve, but also your self-reported measurements of autonomic nervous system function, which are things like blood pressure, sleep architecture, temperature regulation, digestion. All of these things would also improve as well. And, you are objectively healthier. And as a result, you feel subjectively better because you're inhabiting a body that's now running better. So this is great for a lot of guys, but it's not great for everyone. And as we are now recognizing low testosterone in younger men due to what is likely the presence of xenoestrogens, as well as maybe poor lifestyle habits during puberty, there are a lot of factors potentially at play. But this is not a number that resolves everyone's hypogonadal levels. If it was, it'd be a much more straightforward treatment. So while this number is great for some people, it's really only halfway there for others. And I want to give some examples. So I have found this to be more prevalent in younger men, but not exclusively for younger men. I'm definitely not saying if you're under 40, you definitely need higher levels, and if you're over 40, you definitely don't. But there's definitely some, statistical presence of the younger you are, the more likely it is you're going to need a higher level, assuming that you're healthy enough to benefit from that and tolerate it. And the important part here is that in these cases where if this is in fact not the optimal number for you, we wouldn't just expect you to feel better as if it's some kind of recreational drug where the more you take it, the better you feel. We'd actually expect that improved feeling of well-being to come from improved objective markers in health. And I have not found it to be uncommon for younger men to need a free testosterone of upwards of 1200 picomole per liter, which is about a 35 nanogram per deciliter. In many cases, younger men will need a 1500 picomole per liter, which is getting up to a 43 nanograms per deciliter. And in some cases, I've seen clients over the years or patients or doctors that I've mentored need levels even up to a 1700 picomole per liter, which is just coming up to about 50 nanograms per deciliter. Now, in my experience and in my opinion, and my friend Dr. Keith Nichols has also stated this as well, once you get past this point, it's less likely a testosterone issue. For most people, this is going to be the ceiling. And for a lot of people, that ceiling is lower. It might be a 1300 picomole per liter, which would be a 37 nanograms per deciliter. The part where I see a lot of practitioners go wrong is to think that because the patient's testosterone level has been brought out of the gutter, that remaining negative symptoms must not be to do with the testosterone. But what we have to consider here is that if we're looking at a patient who started at, let's say, a 300 picomole per liter free testosterone, being an 8 nanograms per deciliter, and they went up to, let's say, an 800 when they began therapy. So that's what, a 2.5x increase in levels. That's solid. That takes you from an 8 to a 23 nanograms per deciliter. That's great. But if that patient actually needed to go up to the conservative end of that, let's say the 1300 picomole per liter, so from a 23 up to a 37 nanograms per deciliter, well, that's the same distance as when they started to where they were first on therapy. So what this could literally mean is that the patient's only halfway there. And I think sometimes once the number goes bold and in red above the range, providers and patients alike can kind of assume that it's all much of muchness. But this is the same degree of difference as being hypogonadal and being optimized, apparently. So the range that men may need to go on for optimizing their free testosterone is a lot of the time quite a bit higher, and it is very meaningful. That difference of 20 to 30 to 40 milligrams a week or 400 to 500 picomole per liter in free testosterone could be the difference between I don't feel like crap anymore, I feel okay, to being like I feel good. And in cases where this is needed, we see all markers of metabolic health improve. Insulin sensitivity improves, lipids improve, blood pressure improves, sleep improves. All of these things improve. It's not just you feel better, you are actually objectively getting healthier. But if that patient was actually optimal at the 800 picomole per liter, and we took it up to adding all the way up to a 13, 14, 1500 picomole per liter, all the way up to, let's say, a 40 nanogram per deciliter. If they were in fact optimal at that lower level, then we would start to get into a supraphysiological level. Because what is physiological for a healthy 30-year-old is going to not be physiological for an unhealthy, obese, diabetic, alcoholic 80-year-old.
If you've just started TRT, it is completely normal to feel overwhelmed and confused. There's a lot of new territory to cover, and there is a lot of conflicting information. I wrote TRT 101 so that you can have everything that you need to know in an instruction manual in one place that you can refer back to, that you can have all the questions answered before they even come up. TRT 101 is my best practice approach for TRT from start to finish, and it contains everything that you need to avoid all the challenges and pitfalls that I've seen come up in my clients over the last 5 years. You can check it out via the link below.
So there's not a number that it becomes supraphysiological for all men. And it's important to recognize that there is a degree of individual biochemical differences in all of us. Now, we are all men on this therapy. We're all humans as well. So there's going to be things that we all have in common, but there are going to be those individual differences. We can't measure in the blood, and CAG repeats are interesting. I don't think that they're definitive, but we can't measure androgen receptor sensitivity. Testosterone doesn't do anything until it activates the receptor. So we can't measure how many receptors you have or how sensitive they are. We can't really accurately measure how much DHT you're making. I mean, we can pull a number in the blood. It's not accurate though. So the part of this that's the nuance is that once your levels get higher, it becomes less and less likely statistically that you need more. Not ruled out, but less likely. The balance of probability goes down. And it becomes more and more likely that there could be other contributing issues. And my opinion, and the way I've been teaching this for a long time, is to correct the hypogonadism. Start with a dose that brings someone into the playing field, again, up to the top quartile of the range or 20% above. For most people, again, 120, 150 milligrams per week. Give it time. The body needs time to adjust to that. Even if they need double that dose, they still need time for all the systems to get with the program. There's a lot of changes that have to take place. And they're not changes that just have to do with how you feel in the gym, how you look with your shirt off, or how hard your dick is. There are a whole bunch of really important biochemical processes that you don't really think about that testosterone regulates. And if you push a dose up too high too quick, acne, bloating, blood pressure issues, and you might get put off that dose and say, well, that dose isn't right for me. No, you just got there too quick. If you've never drank coffee before and you started with a triple espresso, you're going to be like, coffee's not for me. Maybe a double espresso would have been great for you once you'd worked up to it. You start with a half-shot latte and work up over time. Same with testosterone. But once we get those levels on the map, if it hasn't been assessed already, which it should have, that's when all the other markers of health and hormones and lifestyle practices have to be looked at. Because if someone comes back with a free testosterone of, let's say, again, just for argument's sake, let's say 700 picomole per liter, a 20 nanogram per deciliter free testosterone. And they're saying, well, I feel better, but I don't feel great. Maybe they're sleeping 4 hours a night. Maybe they're drinking 2 or 3 standard drinks every evening. Maybe they're not exercising. Maybe they've got 20 kilos of body fat to lose. Maybe their entire diet is just garbage. Maybe they've got psychological stress issues. Maybe they're looking to optimize sexual performance, but they've got relationship problems. There can be so many conflating factors that throwing more testosterone at it is not going to fix. And if the patient has undiagnosed hypothyroidism, throwing more testosterone at the problem before fixing that, maybe they need both. But throwing more testosterone at the problem before fixing the thyroid issue, well, that's going to cause side effects. It's not going to cause more benefits. So as part of the titration, all other factors need to be assessed. And the good thing about the titration taking time is that it gives the hormone time to work, which we know is important. But it also gives you time to do the work. Because most hypogonadal men, not all, but most, aren't super dialed in with their lifestyle practices because they feel like crap. So if you feel like crap, maybe you've got amazing discipline and you've maintained a 5-day-a-week gym split and you eat clean, you don't drink, and you're doing everything to keep yourself together. I've met those men. There's tons of them out there. But a lot of men are in the scenario of being like, well, I feel like crap anyway, so why not have the drinks? I feel like training doesn't give me the outcomes I should get, so why follow a strict diet? I get it. That's part of being human. These are all reward-driven processes. And if you're not getting the reward, why put the work in? That makes sense. So the habits might take some time to come online, and it also takes time for those habits to be your new baseline default mode. So this gives you some time to work on these things, and it gives your provider, if you're working with a good clinic that knows what they're doing, or you're working with a good doctor, if you're in the US, place like Victory Health, or I've spoken a ton in my TRT Academy about, the best providers to work with outside of the US. But if you're working with someone who knows what they're doing, they should be assessing all of these parameters before you start treatment and after you start treatment to see if maybe you do need to have your thyroid treated or you do need to have DHEA treated. Maybe you've got a bit of fatty liver. Maybe you're insulin resistant and you need some metformin until you drop the body fat. Or maybe you just need to have a kick up the ass from your provider to say, cut the shit and look after yourself better if you want to feel fantastic. Because if you have poor habits, doesn't matter how many hormones or what doses you take. Doesn't matter how good your protocol is. How you feel will be the outcome of your habits. Testosterone will just multiply that. Won't override it. I wish it did. My job would be way easier. Everyone's job in this industry would be way easier. Doesn't work like that. Wish it did. If we could put exercise and diet into a pill, the healthcare industry would be much more efficient. But we can't. Yeah. So the point here is, your testosterone level after starting treatment on your starting dose, if you feel great and if everything is working for you perfectly, perfect, amazing. You don't need any more. And more may not be better. More could actually be worse. But if you are working with a competent provider who can assess for things and say, well, there's a lot of room here to put these levels up safely and still conservatively, and you're looking after yourself pretty well, maybe not perfectly, but pretty well, and you don't have other hormone issues and you don't have other blood work issues that we can identify and resolve, that's when the dose should be titrated. And as long as the objective improvements in health continue to grow every time you put the dose up and the blood work gets reviewed and the overall metabolic health improves, all symptoms continue to improve, there are no side effects from putting the dose up, there's a hell of a lot of room there to increase. And in a lot of cases, that can be the game changer. I've had men come to me over the years thinking they need pregnenolone, DHEA, thyroid, all these different things. Nope. They just needed an extra 5 milligrams of testosterone a day, or if they're doing less frequent injections, maybe they need an extra 30 milligrams of testosterone a week. And that's it. That's what it is. Other times, they needed to drop their testosterone dose and they needed some thyroid, or they needed some DHEA, or they needed some pregnenolone, or they needed all of the above. It can be different in different circumstances. But it's so important that providers don't say, well, your testosterone levels aren't garbage, so because they're not garbage, this is optimal for you. Because you might only be halfway there. So hope that helped. Make sure you're working with someone who is advocating for your best interest. You shouldn't have to go into your provider's office and advocate for yourself for them to do the right thing by you. Find someone who knows what they're doing to steer the ship, because they'll steer it much better than you can. Hope that helps. Hope that gets you the treatment that you deserve. And I'll see you guys all next time. I think when it comes to testosterone, you want to get the optimal benefits of testosterone, and testosterone will continue to become more optimal for you until you take too much. There's not a lot that's changed in injectable dosing for testosterone in the last few years. It's just